Hey there and welcome back to another Fruits Basket review, and oh my god, this was a pretty intense episode with a whole heap of plot progression as well as a whole heap of drama. Now just before we get started, I will say I have read the manga and watched the finale, so I'm fully aware of any relevant plot points or details. However, for the purpose of these reviews, I really only like to talk about what the anime is presenting so far and not jump back and forth between manga and anime. This is mostly so I can keep the review streamlined, and it allows anime-only fans to watch along and join in too. That being said though, let's get started on the episode. We start off with a little depressing monologue by Yuki describing how he regrets the paths he's chosen and the life that he's lived, whilst we see a montage of the empty house and a sad Shigure and Yuki. There's not really much to say about this scene other than it's kind of bleak and really just serves to set the scene, that the world hasn't been right since Toru went into the hospital and that it feels empty and cold without her. It's very reminiscent of the beginning of the series and how it seemed both Yuki and Shigure felt before Toru moved in. We then have a brief scene set in the student council office, where Kakeru inquires after both Toru and Kyo, with Yuki getting a bit defensive and shrugging off his questions, particularly those about Kyo. We then have a humorous exchange between Kimi, Yuki and Kakeru, where Kimi asks what the relationship between Yuki and Toru actually is, and whether they're dating, leading to Kakeru straight up telling her that she's actually his mother and took him from his most vulnerable and helped build him back up, which was honestly kind of funny. It's very typical of Kakeru to be upfront with somebody's weird secrets, but at the same time, no one else really takes him seriously because he jokes around all the time. The horror and embarrassment on Yuki's face as well just makes the scene feel complete. Meanwhile, now steadily going more and more insane, both at the laziness of his peers, and also probably because once again Yuki finds himself getting the attention of the ladies whilst now is forever alone. Poor kid. I very much like this scene. It feels like forever since there's been a scene that's basically only there to make you laugh and lighten the mood. It feels like almost the whole season has been wall-to-wall drama, so infusing some comedy into the episodes again was a welcome relief for sure. It also felt like kind of a bit of a farewell to the student council gang, with each of the members fulfilling their role in their little dynamic one last time. It's kind of a shame that we haven't seen as much of them recently, but then again, we got them a whole lot during season 2, especially compared to some of the other main characters, and their role in the story definitely ended a long time ago, and probably would have bogged down the main plot, even if they would have been great for comic relief. We then see Uotani and Hanajima enter the room, probably to talk to Yuki, and this acts as a nice little transition scene to the hospital where Hanajima and Uotani have been visiting Toru. After a brief discussion about how Kyo hasn't been seen since Toru went to the hospital, we see Akito exit the hospital room and come face to face with Uotani and Hanajima. Akito tells them that she believes that Toru's accident was her fault, but this is denied by Hanajima. Before Akito goes on, telling them that she knows about Uotani and Kuruno and that she'd stabbed him and put him in the hospital. She tells them that she essentially forced him to stay by her side as a passive spectator with no thoughts or opinions of his own, but that despite all that, he won't blame her for what she's done. Hanajima then guesses that she's actually a woman, and then goes on to correctly guess that she's the woman that Kuruno had said he'd stay with because she needed him. Side note, but since she has psychic powers, does this mean she knows about the curse to a certain extent? Would she be able to figure out that Kyo and Yuki and the rest were not typical humans and had a special type of spiritual aura? I think it would be very Hanajima to be perfectly aware of everything and yet just not say anything about it. Plus, you'd think that with Kuruno and Orisa becoming an item, it's only a matter of time before he'd actually tell her what was up. And it's very hard to believe that Hanajima would be the last person to know. Just food for thought. Uotani then reflects on her experiences with Kuruno, realizing that she hardly knew him at all and that she'd spent so little time with him. That she was largely a footnote in his life compared to this other woman. And yet she goes over and hugs her, even though Akito seems like she's expecting to get herself put through a table. And let's just once again commend how nice these two girls are. Did Kyoko just emanate this kindly aura that creates the sweetest, most forgiving people in the world? I'm sure that everyone's well aware that Akito played a role in Toru's hospital stay, even if it wasn't entirely her fault. She did cut her arm up pretty bad, and she also almost stabbed one of their love interests to death, and yet they smile, hug and console her. And I'll tell you what, Akito's having a run of good luck running into all these super forgiving people. We then transition once again to Kuruno's hospital room where Uotani finally reunites with Kuruno for the first time since season 2. He tells her that he didn't think she'd come and see him considering how things were left off, and goes on to tell her that he has one final thing he has to do for Akito. Leave. So then she won't have to feel the guilt of having made him give up his happiness to stay by her side. Uotani then fakes him out, acting as if he can leave and she wouldn't care, but then telling him that she'd follow him anywhere. She then tells him that if he doesn't understand why she'd follow him, it's too bad and she wouldn't tell him. But obviously we, and he, know it's because she loves him. She then tells him she's going to be more than a footnote in his life, and the scene moves on. And it's nice that we wrapped up one of the storylines of the show. There are a whole lot of different plot threads and story arcs and characters that kind of need a bit of a conclusion, and this really serves as the end of their story. Yeah, they may appear again, but this is the end of their personal journey. The further you go, the less you want to have to cram all the different endings in for each character into the last episode or two, so it's smart to start wrapping things up with the minor characters as you go along. We then get a return to humour with a fun little scene between Yuki and Shigure as they walk back to the house. With Shigure lamenting the fact that they've sunk so low as they have to eat a convenience store breakfast as they've burned through all their supplies whilst Toru's been in the hospital. And honestly, this does not bode well for when Toru eventually moves out. Sure, Shigure would be fine as he'll move back to the Soma estate most likely, but Yuki, who will move away for college, will surely starve to death. Shigure then muses that Toru's spoiled them and they've regressed in their ability to take care of themselves to an even worse level than when they first met. And back then, their kitchen was overflowing with garbage and dirty dishes. Inside the house, they discover Haru, who proceeds to try and disturb Yuki with his innuendos and discussion of Rin's breasts. And I liked this little scene as it kind of showcases how far Yuki's character's come. From the unfunny straight man character to the exasperated and tired victim of his family's creepy jokes and banter. It's always fun to see him get involved with the humorous sides of the show, which really kicked off once he joined the student council and came out of his shell. Good stuff. The more serious part of the episode begins when they hear a noise upstairs, which of course means that Kyo's back at the house, causing an irritated Yuki to storm upstairs and hound Kyo for his foolishness. After a brief discussion of how Kyo thinks it would be better for him to leave and Yuki to be there for Toru, he gets kicked through a door. Ouch. The two then have an argument about how Kyo's not a superhero and can't expect to be one, with Kyo responding that Yuki could never understand and that he'd always wanted to be like him. Yuki then flips out and continues beating on Kyo, who gets absolutely obliterated, before revealing that he too wanted to be like Kyo, but they are themselves and they shouldn't try to be anything else. He goes on to tell Kyo that Toru only wants Kyo and that Yuki would never be enough for her, and that he protected her just fine and doesn't need to be a superhero, just Kyo. And this was both an intense and pretty meaningful scene. We finally got to see that the anger and resentment they hold towards each other is almost entirely rooted in their own insecurities and jealousy, and that actually they are the person the other one probably admires most of all. Friendship incoming? I hope so. Also, I love that the violence and the drama was interspersed with Shigure crying about the damage being inflicted on his house, and Haru asking whether he could order some pizza and nuggets. And I really enjoyed this. It felt very reminiscent of the early episodes of the show. And since they don't really want to go back to the ultra dramatic tone of the past couple of episodes, they do need to add these moments of levity where they can keep it a little lighter, and worked well. I also feel bad for Shigure. It must suck to have your house constantly destroyed because a bunch of teenagers aren't able to keep a hold over their emotions and just burst through doors, walls, ceilings, and windows. I would be shocked if they don't have a handyman come around every other day because of this type of stuff. Imagine being the tradesperson getting called out to the same house week after week. It's frankly ridiculous when you think it through. After Kyo and Yuki's showdown, we then see Kyo heeding Yuki's advice to go after Toru, walking along the bridge monologuing about how he has to confront his father before he's able to go and see her, so that he can finally put his past behind him. We then have a cute little scene with Kisa and Hiro, where Kisa tries to reassure Hiro that none of the other Zodiac members are going to be angry at him for his curse breaking, whilst theirs hasn't. He then asks her whether it bothers her to be around him since he's free and she isn't, but she flips it around and asks the same thing. And these two are actually adorable. They are the best couple in the show by far in my opinion, just so pure and sweet. The first thing they want to do is make sure the other one is okay with how things have gone down, and they're just worried the other one won't like them anymore. They then notice Kyo walk past, and we return to the more serious scene where Kyo's about to confront his dad. We see him enter his father's room and immediately get verbally assaulted by his dad, asking him how dare he come into the house without looking guilty at all. Quite humorously, he doesn't even respond to his dad's provocations and simply judges him for his day drinking, to which his father blabbers out some excuses. And I really love to see the abusers get shown up a little bit. His father then blames him for not feeling well before throwing his mother's death in his face, saying that it was his fault that she died. He continues to rant and rave about how everything is Kyo's fault until Kyo finally relents and tells him he's right. And honestly, the look on his face is priceless. Like he never in a million years expected that he'd actually agree with him. Like he expected Kyo to be just as narcissistic as him and never own up to anything. The surprise doesn't last, however, as his dad quickly orders his maid to call the main family to lock him up and begins laughing hysterically, giddy at finally defeating his son. Kyo, however, refuses, telling him that he will not be locked away in the cat house and that he's going to live, that there's somebody he wanted to be with. To say that his dad doesn't take that well would be an understatement. And he calls him an unforgivable person, a stain on the family, a monster, filthy, you name it, he says it. He even launches a glass at him that narrowly misses, and Kyo doesn't even flinch. Chad. He goes on to rant that his life was ruined by Kyo and by his mother who birthed a freak. Ouch. And this unlocks some memories in Kyo, who realizes it wasn't him that drove his mum to suicide. It was his dad's abusive behaviour. His constant cruelty to her for birthing a child he couldn't love. He then reflects that he wishes his mother hadn't given up on life and that she could have tried to live and be happy. He decides to try to live and his dad tries to grab him, but after Kyo responds with force, he reveals himself to be a pitiful coward, squealing about how Kyo's gonna kill him. God, he's such a pathetic loser. We then cut to Akito talking with the old maid, with the maid asking whether she should have somebody sent to collect Kyo and confine him like his father wants. Akito tells her she's gonna go herself, as she wants to tell Kyo's father face to face that Kyo's free and won't be confined, and that the cottage is going to be destroyed. The maid then tells her it must be nice to be young and be able to change her way of thinking, but that she spent her entire life living on the estate and in a non-changing mindset that makes it too frightening to change. In response, Akito says that's fine, but she's going to keep moving forward. And I wasn't really sure what the point of this exchange was. We already know that Akito wants to move forward, and I don't think anybody needed a reminder of that, especially when compared to some D-level character like the head maid. Kind of felt like filler. Something else more interesting could have honestly gone here, as we didn't need a showcase of Akito's already established character development. Although, I do find it slightly funny that the maid doesn't even get mad. For someone that is so sure of their way of thinking and is so rooted in their way of life, she doesn't even put up a fight when it changes. I guess it just goes to show that what's most important to her at the end of the day is her loyalty to the family head, and that she'll ultimately follow whatever path they choose. And I think it ultimately shows that she is in fact capable of change, whether she realizes it or not. Although it doesn't make me like her or sympathize with her in any way. She's still kind of trash. We then cut back to Kyo at his dad's house, where he reflects that it wasn't easy to get the answers he needed about what he needs to do and how he should go about it, but he got them in the end. He turns and leaves, telling his father he was going to visit again, as he rants and raves about how he'll never be forgiven. And man, I don't know, it kind of feels sad that he'd even consider coming back to talk to that guy. He's clearly a narcissist that needs to be cut off from Kyo's life. There's just no hope with this man, just like Ren. Surely he's beyond saving at this point. Although maybe he thinks talking to him will help him come to some more personal epiphanies. Or it could even be his own form of revenge, tormenting his father with his presence. I doubt it, but that is funny to think about. Then we head back to Yuki, who's still sitting in the hallway after his fight with Kyo, as he reflects that in life you can't get through without making mistakes, but that you shouldn't shy away from them. That you have to keep walking your path towards your goal, whether that goal is something or someone. And honestly, I have to say, this kid is the most philosophical person I've ever seen. And these characters ponder their feelings quite a lot and in quite a lot of detail. Seriously, he considers everything so deeply. And it's quite funny considering his otherwise nonchalant demeanour. And then Machi calls, asking him to meet her so she can give him something. And then he sprints off all giddy, asking her to wait for him because he's so excited to see her. And it's all very cute, honestly, and it really shows how far he's come as a character. Imagine season 1 Yuki getting this giddy and excited. It would feel weird. So I'm very excited to see what happens there. We then finish the episode following Kyo again, who heads towards the hospital, wondering whether Toru will even want to see him after everything he said, and whether he even feels the same about her as he did before, until he sees her and realizes, yes he does. And then she sees him, they have a dramatic stare down, and she turns and sprints away, leaving him in the dust, with no choice but to chase her down. And yeah, fair enough, he did break her heart, so fair play that she embarrasses him like that. And that brings us to the end of the episode, and it was a really good one, the perfect balance of drama and comedy, and a good episode leading into the final 3. That being said, that's just my opinion, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Like it? Hate it? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.